In 2008, when the global financial system was on its knees, when Lehman Brothers had just collapsed and Wall Street was hemorrhaging billions, one man stood apart from the chaos: Bernie Madoff, chairman of NASDAQ, respected philanthropist, Wall Street royalty. While other firms were imploding, investors were actually begging Madoff to take their money. His fund hadn't lost value in 17 years. Not once. In the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, Bernie Madoff's investment firm was an island of absolute stability. But nobody knew. Every single dollar in that fund was fake. The returns, fiction, the trading, never happened. Bernie Madoff wasn't running an investment firm. He was running the largest Ponzi scheme in human history. $65 billion. That's not a typo. $65 billion simply vanished. And the most disturbing part? It wasn't sophisticated. There were no complex derivatives, no exotic financial instruments. It was shockingly simple. A high school student could have done it. So how did a man operating what amounted to basic arithmetic fraud fool the most sophisticated investors in the world for nearly 30 years? How did he pass regulatory inspections? How did he look his closest friends in the eye while stealing their life savings? And why, when he had multiple chances to walk away clean, did he keep going until the entire house of cards collapsed? Stay with me, because understanding Bernie Madoff isn't just about understanding one criminal. It's about understanding a flaw in human psychology so profound that we're all vulnerable to it. And what happened in those final 72 hours before his arrest will change how you see everything about trust, money, and the people you think you know. Here's what we're going to cover: how Bernie built his empire of lies from $5,000, the whistleblower who warned regulators 5 times and was ignored, and why Bernie's own sons turned him in. Stay until the end, because what happened to the Madoff family afterward is something nobody wants to talk about. December 10th, 2008. The scene is Madoff's Manhattan apartment. Luxury incarnate, the kind of wealth that whispers rather than shouts. Bernie Madoff sits across from his 2 sons, Mark and Andrew. These aren't just his children, they're senior executives at his legitimate trading firm. They've worked alongside their father for their entire adult lives, and Bernie is about to destroy them. He tells them the investment advisory business, the prestigious fund that managed billions for celebrities, charities, and European aristocrats, is completely fraudulent. There is no money. There never was. It's all been a lie, a giant Ponzi scheme. His sons are horrified, shattered. Within 24 hours, they'll turn him into federal authorities. Bernie Madoff will be arrested at his apartment the next morning, and the world will learn that one of Wall Street's most trusted names had been running a criminal enterprise for decades. But that's the end of the story, and the end doesn't teach us anything. What we need to understand is the beginning. How does someone become Bernie Madoff? Because he wasn't born a monster. In fact, his early life was remarkably ordinary. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born in 1938 in Queens, New York. His parents were working-class immigrants. His father bounced between jobs, tried running a sporting goods store that failed. Money was always tight. Bernie grew up watching his parents struggle, watching them worry about bills, watching financial insecurity corrode their marriage. And he made himself a promise. He would never be poor. He would never be powerless. He would master money, not be mastered by it. Bernie was smart. Not genius-level brilliant, but sharp enough. More importantly, he was charming. He had that rare gift of making people feel special, feel seen. When Bernie talked to you, you felt like the most important person in the room. In high school, he started dating a girl named Ruth. They were inseparable. Ruth believed in Bernie completely, saw something special in him that nobody else could see yet. They married young, and Ruth's parents loaned Bernie $5,000 to start a business. It was 1960. Bernie was 22 years old, and with that $5,000, he started Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. What's crucial to understand is that in the beginning, it was completely legitimate. Bernie wasn't starting a criminal enterprise. He was starting a real business. His firm made money by trading stocks for clients and taking a small commission on each trade. It was honest work, unglamorous, but honest. The problem was that it was also brutally competitive. Wall Street in the 1960s was dominated by a handful of massive firms with century-old pedigrees and aristocratic client lists. Bernie Madoff was a kid from Queens operating out of a tiny office. Nobody was taking him seriously, so Bernie did what he always did. He found an angle. At the time, stock trading was inefficient and opaque. Prices weren't standardized. Different exchanges quoted different prices for the same stock. There was no computer system connecting everything. It was chaos. Bernie saw an opportunity. He started investing heavily in computer technology when most of Wall Street was still using paper and telephones. He built electronic systems that could execute trades faster and more efficiently than anyone else, and it worked. By the 1970s, Madoff's firm was handling about 5% of all trading volume on the New York Stock Exchange. 5%. For a firm that had started with $5,000 and zero connections, that was extraordinary. Bernie became wealthy. Respectably, impressively wealthy. He bought a house in the Hamptons, joined the right clubs, started moving in circles that would have been unimaginable to his parents. But the thing about Bernie Madoff is that being wealthy wasn't enough. He needed to be important. He needed to be revered. The legitimate trading business made him rich, but it didn't make him special. Any smart guy with computers could do what he was doing. So Bernie started a second business within his firm, an investment advisory service. This was different from the trading operation. This wasn't about executing trades for clients. This was about managing people's wealth, investing their money, and delivering returns. And this is where everything would eventually go wrong. But building a legitimate fortune was only the beginning. Because what Bernie did next, the psychological manipulation he perfected, explains why the smartest investors in the world never saw it coming. Now, nobody knows exactly when Bernie Madoff started the fraud. He himself gave conflicting accounts. Sometimes he said it began in 1987 during a market crash. Sometimes he claimed early 1990s. Investigators believe it may have started even earlier, possibly in the 1970s. But whenever it started, the mechanism was always the same: a Ponzi scheme. Here's how it works. An investor gives you $100,000 to invest. You promise them 10% annual returns. At the end of the year, you send them a statement showing they now have $110,000. Except you never actually invested the money. You just kept it. The statement is fiction. Now, if that investor wants to withdraw their money, you have a problem. You need to give them $110,000, but you only have their original $100,000. So what do? You find a new investor. You take their money and use it to pay the first investor. As long as new money keeps coming in, you can keep paying out the people who want to withdraw. The scheme sustains itself, but it requires constant growth. The moment withdrawals exceed new investments, the whole thing collapses. It's named after Charles Ponzi, an Italian immigrant who became famous for this exact scheme in 1920. It's not sophisticated, it's not even clever, it's simple fraud, and it always ends the same way. Total collapse. Everyone who studied finance knew this. Everyone on Wall Street knew this. And yet, Bernie Madoff ran this scheme for decades without getting caught. How? The answer reveals something deeply unsettling about human nature and the financial system itself. Bernie's Ponzi scheme succeeded because of one thing above all else: trust. Not just ordinary trust. Absolute, unshakable, irrational trust. Bernie didn't target random people off the street. He targeted a very specific type of investor. Wealthy, sophisticated, connected, people who considered themselves too smart to be conned. He cultivated an image of exclusivity. His investment fund wasn't something you could just buy into. You had to be invited. You had to know someone. Bernie would actually turn people away, tell them he didn't have room for new investors. This created desperate demand. When people finally got access to Madoff's fund, they felt privileged, chosen. They didn't ask hard questions because they were too grateful to be let in. Bernie also exploited social networks with surgical precision. He embedded himself in wealthy Jewish communities, country clubs, charity boards. He became a major philanthropist, donated millions to hospitals, universities, theaters. He wasn't buying influence. He was buying credibility. When your friend at the country club tells you Bernie Madoff manages his money and has delivered consistent returns for 20 years, you don't ask for an audit. You ask for an introduction. Bernie weaponized social proof. The returns he promised were clever too, not too high. He wasn't promising 50% or 100% annually. That would have raised suspicion. Instead, he delivered steady, consistent returns of about 10 to 12% per year. Good, but not unbelievable. And here's the key. Those returns never changed. The stock market would crash. Madoff's fund would deliver 10%. The market would boom. Madoff's fund would deliver 10%. In an industry defined by volatility, Bernie Madoff offered certainty. And wealthy people will pay almost anything for certainty. But the consistency should have been the red flag. In financial markets, consistent returns don't exist. Every legitimate investment strategy has bad years. Every fund manager experiences volatility. A fund that never loses money isn't good. It's impossible. And yet, nobody questioned it. Because Bernie had one more layer of protection: respectability. In 1990, Bernie Madoff became chairman of NASDAQ, the second largest stock exchange in America. Let that sink in. The man running a massive criminal fraud was simultaneously serving as chairman of a major stock exchange. He advised the Securities and Exchange Commission on market regulation. He was on panels with federal regulators, testifying before Congress about how to make markets more transparent and honest. The sheer audacity is breathtaking. But it worked. Who's going to suspect the chairman of NASDAQ of running a Ponzi scheme? It's like discovering the Surgeon General has been selling fake medicine. The cognitive dissonance is too extreme. Your brain simply rejects the possibility. So Bernie's investors didn't just trust him, they revered him. He was a Wall Street statesman, a philanthropist, a success story, the American dream personified. And beneath that gleaming surface, Bernie Madoff was stealing every single day. The investment advisory business occupied one floor of his offices. His legitimate trading operation was on a different floor. Employees from the two sides rarely interacted. The investment advisory floor was surprisingly small. Just a handful of employees, and they weren't finance professionals. They weren't portfolio managers or quantitative analysts. They were basically clerks. Their job was simple: generate fake statements. When a client invested money, that money went into a bank account. It just sat there. Nothing was purchased. No stocks, no bonds, nothing. Meanwhile, employees would create official-looking statements showing trades that never happened, gains that were pure fiction. They used outdated computer systems, dot matrix printers, paperwork that looked decades old. It was almost comically unsophisticated, but sophistication wasn't the point. The point was that nobody looked. Bernie's reputation meant the statements were accepted without verification. And when regulators did occasionally examine Madoff's operation, they only looked at the legitimate trading business downstairs, which was completely clean. The fraud was hidden in plain sight, one floor up. Now you might be thinking, someone had to notice. Someone had to ask questions. And you're right, someone did. His name was Harry Markopoulos. He was a financial analyst, and in 1999, his boss asked him to figure out how Bernie Madoff was generating such consistent returns. The boss wanted to copy Madoff's strategy. So Markopoulos started analyzing Madoff's claimed trading approach. Madoff said he used something called a split-strike conversion strategy. It involved buying blue-chip stocks and using options to protect against losses. On paper, it sounded plausible. But when Markopoulos ran the numbers, they didn't work. The strategy Madoff described couldn't possibly generate the returns he was claiming. The math was impossible. Then, Markopoulos looked at trading volume. Madoff claimed to be moving billions of dollars in and out of positions, but when Markopoulos checked market data, he couldn't find evidence of trades at that scale. It was like someone claiming they bought 1 million cars, but there was no record of any car dealership selling them. Markopoulos reached a conclusion. Bernie Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme. It was the only explanation that fit the evidence. And Harry Markopoulos did something extraordinary. He reported it. In 2000, he sent a detailed report to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC is the government agency responsible for preventing exactly this kind of fraud. Markopoulos handed them a roadmap. He showed them the math. He explained why the returns were impossible. He identified the red flags. The SEC investigated, and they found nothing. They concluded Madoff was legitimate. Markopoulos was stunned. He tried again. In 2001, he sent more evidence. The SEC investigated again. Again, they found nothing. Over the next 8 years, Markopoulos would contact the SEC 5 separate times, each time with more evidence, each time explaining in excruciating detail why Madoff had to be a fraud. And each time, the SEC either ignored him or conducted an investigation so incompetent it missed the obvious. In one investigation, SEC examiners actually asked Madoff if he was running a Ponzi scheme. He said no. They accepted his answer and closed the case. It's almost impossible to comprehend the level of failure involved, but it reveals something critical. The system wasn't designed to catch someone like Bernie Madoff. The regulatory framework assumed that major fraud would be sophisticated, hidden in complex financial instruments and offshore accounts. Bernie's fraud was so simple, so brazen, that it didn't fit the profile, and his reputation provided camouflage. Regulators unconsciously assumed that someone of Madoff's stature couldn't be a criminal, so they looked, but they didn't see. Meanwhile, Bernie kept going. The fund grew larger. 5 billion, 10 billion, 20 billion. The amount of money that would need to be repaid to investors kept increasing, and Bernie knew with absolute certainty that it couldn't last forever. The math of a Ponzi scheme is unforgiving. Eventually, withdrawals will exceed deposits. Eventually, the scheme collapses. There is no other ending. So why didn't Bernie stop? But the SEC's catastrophic failure isn't even the darkest part of this story. Because what was happening inside Bernie's mind, the psychological trap he had built for himself, reveals why he kept going even when escape was still possible. This is the question that haunts everyone who studies the Madoff case. Bernie had opportunities to walk away, multiple opportunities. In the early 2000s, he was already fabulously wealthy from his legitimate business. The trading operation was generating tens of millions in profits every year. He had homes, yachts, respect, legacy. He could have quietly closed the investment advisory fund, claimed he was retiring that part of the business, and lived out his days in luxury. Nobody would have known. The fraud would have died with him. But he didn't. He kept going. Investigators and psychologists have tried to understand why. Some say it was ego. Bernie loved being the man everyone wanted access to. Closing the fund would mean admitting he couldn't deliver the impossible returns. It would mean becoming ordinary. Others say it was fear. By the time he might have stopped, so many powerful people had invested with him. Closing the fund would have prompted questions he couldn't answer. He was trapped. But I think there's something deeper, something that gets to the core of who Bernie Madoff was. He was addicted to the con itself, not the money, the performance. Every day that the scheme continued was proof of his superiority. He was fooling everyone, the investors, the regulators, the media, his competitors, even his own family. In a perverse way, the fraud was his greatest achievement. More impressive than building a legitimate business, more thrilling than any real success could ever be. And like any addict, he couldn't stop, even when he wanted to, even when he knew how it would end. The 2008 financial crisis changed everything. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in September, panic spread through global markets. Investors everywhere started pulling money out of funds, converting everything to cash. It was a rational response to fear, but for Bernie Madoff, it was a death sentence. Redemption requests started flooding in. Investors wanted their money back, hundreds of millions of dollars, then billions. In a legitimate fund, this would be manageable. You'd sell assets, raise cash, and pay out investors. But Bernie didn't have any assets. He had a bank account with whatever new deposits had recently come in, and he had a growing list of people demanding money that didn't exist. For the first time in decades, Bernie couldn't pay. He stalled, made excuses, promised the money was coming. He scrambled to find new investors, but in the middle of a financial crisis, nobody was investing. Everyone was withdrawing. By November 2008, Bernie knew it was over. He had run out of moves. The Ponzi scheme that had sustained itself for decades was finally collapsing. And Bernie Madoff did something that still shocks investigators. He told his wife Ruth that the firm was having liquidity problems. He told her he might need to distribute bonuses early to employees. $200 million in bonuses. Ruth didn't question it. Why would she? Bernie had always handled the business. What Ruth didn't know was that Bernie was planning to take that $200 million and distribute it to family and close friends before the whole scheme imploded. It was a final act of theft, looting whatever was left before the end. But before he could execute the plan, something stopped him. We don't know what. Conscience? Fear of making things worse? Investigators never got a clear answer. What we do know is that in early December, Bernie started acting erratically. Employees noticed he seemed distracted, anxious. He told his secretary he was struggling to sleep. Then, on December 9th, Bernie told his brother Peter that the investment advisory business was in trouble. He said he needed to distribute the remaining money, about $200 to $300 million, as bonuses before the end of the year. Peter was confused. He didn't understand why they'd distribute bonuses when the firm was struggling, but Bernie insisted. The next morning, December 10th, Bernie called his sons Mark and Andrew to his apartment. This was unusual. Bernie kept his family separate from the investment advisory business. His sons worked on the legitimate trading side. They didn't have access to the advisory operation. But now, Bernie needed to tell someone. Maybe he was exhausted from carrying the secret alone. Maybe he wanted to confess. Maybe he hoped they could somehow fix it. We'll never know his true motivation. What we know is that he sat them down in his apartment and told them everything. The investment advisory business was a fraud, a giant Ponzi scheme. There was no money. It had all been a lie. His sons were devastated, destroyed. They asked how much money was missing. Bernie said roughly $50 billion. The number was incomprehensible. Mark and Andrew left the apartment in shock. They immediately hired a lawyer. And the next day, December 11, 2008, they turned their father in to federal authorities. That same day, FBI agents arrived at Bernie Madoff's apartment at 8 in the morning. Bernie answered the door in his bathrobe. The agents asked if he knew why they were there. Bernie said, "I know what you're here for." He invited them in, offered them coffee, then he confessed. He told them he had been running a Ponzi scheme for years. He said it was all his fault. Nobody else was involved. He was ready to face consequences. The agents arrested him on the spot. By that afternoon, the story had broken. Bernie Madoff, former chairman of NASDAQ, respected Wall Street elder statesman, had been arrested for running the largest Ponzi scheme in history. The world reacted with disbelief, then horror, then rage. As investigators untangled the fraud, the true scale of the damage became clear. $65 billion. That was the amount shown on client statements. Money that investors believed they had. Money that never existed. The actual amount that investors had deposited over the years was roughly $20 billion. The rest was fictional gains. But it didn't matter. $20 billion or $65 billion. It was all gone. Charities that had entrusted their endowments to Madoff were wiped out. Overnight, organizations that funded cancer research, poverty relief, education, gone. Retirees who had given Madoff their life savings discovered they had nothing. People who thought they were wealthy enough to retire comfortably learned they were destitute. Some victims committed suicide. Thierry Magon de la Villouche, a French aristocrat who had invested his own money and his clients' money with Madoff, was found dead in his Manhattan office. He had taken sleeping pills and slit his wrists. William Foxton, a British veteran and former soldier, killed himself after losing his family's savings. The human wreckage was incalculable, and the betrayal was intimate. These weren't anonymous victims. Many were Bernie's close friends, people he had known for decades, people who had eaten at his home, vacationed with him, trusted him completely. Bernie had looked them in the eye at charity galas and country clubs, knowing he was stealing from them, knowing he was destroying their futures, and he did it anyway. The question everyone asked was, how could he? Psychologists have studied Bernie extensively. The consensus is that he exhibits traits of narcissistic personality disorder and sociopathy, the ability to compartmentalize, to separate his actions from their consequences, to view people not as human beings, but as props in his performance. But clinical diagnoses don't fully explain it, because Bernie wasn't a stereotypical sociopath. He wasn't cold or robotic. By all accounts, he was warm, charming, engaging. He had a family he seemed to love, friends he genuinely enjoyed. He cried at funerals. He laughed at jokes. In every outward way, he seemed human, and that's what makes him so disturbing. Bernie Madoff proves that monstrosity doesn't require horns and fangs. It can wear a kind face. It can tell jokes and donate to charity and seem, in every visible way, normal. The fraud also revealed catastrophic failures at every level of the financial system. The SEC had received credible, detailed warnings about Madoff for years and done nothing. Major banks that processed Madoff's transactions, including J.P. Morgan Chase, had internally flagged suspicious activity but never reported it to authorities. Accounting firms that were supposed to audit Madoff's operation either failed to do their jobs or were complicit. The entire regulatory framework designed to prevent this kind of fraud had failed completely. In March 2009, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies. He admitted to securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, perjury, and making false filings with the SEC. He refused to cooperate with investigators. He insisted he had acted alone, that nobody else in his firm or family knew about the fraud. Investigators didn't believe him. They thought it was impossible for Bernie to have run a scheme of that scale without help. But Bernie never wavered. He maintained that his employees, his brother, his sons were all innocent. In June 2009, Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison, the maximum possible. The judge called his crimes extraordinarily evil. Bernie was 71 years old. He would die in prison, and he did. Bernie Madoff died in 2021 at age 82, still incarcerated, but the damage he caused extended far beyond his own life. His son, Mark, who had turned him in, hanged himself in his apartment in 2010, on the second anniversary of his father's arrest. He left behind a wife and young children. Mark's suicide note didn't mention his father, but the timing made the message clear. His other son, Andrew, developed cancer. He believed the stress from the scandal contributed to his illness. Andrew died in 2014. Bernie's wife, Ruth, became a pariah. She surrendered almost all of her wealth, was left with $2.5 million under an agreement with prosecutors, and lived in isolation. Former friends refused to speak to her. She gave one interview years later in which she said she and Bernie had attempted suicide together after his arrest, taking pills in a failed attempt to end their lives. She claimed she didn't know about the fraud. Nobody believed her. Bernie's brother Peter pleaded guilty to falsifying records and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Employees from the investment advisory side of the firm were prosecuted. Some went to prison. Others cooperated with authorities. The Madoff family was obliterated, and yet, the story doesn't end with justice served and lessons learned. Because there's one more piece of this that nobody talks about. The people who profited from Bernie Madoff's downfall. Irving Picard was the court-appointed trustee responsible for recovering money for Madoff's victims. His law firm has made over $1 billion in fees from the Madoff bankruptcy case. $1 billion. The lawyers and accountants who worked on unwinding the fraud have collectively earned more than the victims have recovered. Think about that. The professional class that failed to prevent the fraud, that missed every warning sign, that enabled Bernie Madoff to operate for decades, is now profiting from cleaning up the mess. And there's something else. A few investors actually made money from Madoff. Not fictional returns on a statement, real money. People who invested early and withdrew before the collapse. They received payments that were funded by later investors. Under bankruptcy law, those payments can be clawed back. So investigators have sued these so-called net winners to recover the money. But many of these people had no idea they were part of a fraud. They thought they were making legitimate withdrawals from a legitimate investment, and now they're being told they have to give the money back, sometimes decades later. Some have been financially destroyed by these clawback lawsuits. Is that justice? It's hard to say. The Madoff case reveals an uncomfortable truth about financial fraud. When it's this large, there's no such thing as making victims whole. The money is gone, recovery is partial at best, and the process of seeking justice often creates new victims. So what do we take from all of this? Bernie Madoff was a criminal, that's indisputable. But he was also a symptom of deeper problems, a financial system that prioritized reputation over verification, regulators who were outmatched and underfunded, a culture that worshipped wealth and never asked where it came from, and perhaps most troubling, a human vulnerability. Our need to believe. We want to believe that someone has figured it out, that there's a strategy, a secret, a way to beat the market and achieve certainty in an uncertain world. Bernie Madoff sold that fantasy, and we bought it, not because we were stupid, but because we were human. The real lesson of Bernie Madoff isn't about financial fraud. It's about trust, who we give it to, why we give it, and what happens when it's betrayed. Bernie Madoff didn't just steal money. He stole something more fundamental, the belief that the system works, that good people are rewarded and bad people are punished, that if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll be safe. He proved that none of that is guaranteed, that a charming man in a nice suit can lie to your face for decades and sleep soundly at night. And that's a far more terrifying truth than any amount of stolen money. In his final years in prison, Bernie Madoff gave a few interviews. He showed no real remorse. He intellectualized his crimes, talked about them like they were abstract problems. He complained about his treatment in prison. He seemed baffled that people hated him. In one interview, he said, "I'm not the monster people think I am." But he was wrong, not because he was uniquely evil, but because he was proof that monsters don't look like monsters. They look like us. They live among us. They smile and shake hands and donate to charity. And by the time you realize what they are, it's far too late. Bernie Madoff destroyed thousands of lives. He obliterated his own family. He damaged trust in financial markets for a generation. And in the end, he died alone in a prison cell, having lost everything that ever mattered. There's no redemption in this story, no silver lining, just a cautionary tale about greed, ego, and the lies we tell ourselves. Bernie Madoff was a genius, not at investing, at deception. The next time someone offers you returns that seem too consistent, too good, too certain, remember this story. Remember that the chairman of NASDAQ fooled everyone for 30 years, and ask yourself one question: what am I not seeing?